Okay, I guess we're going to get started, everyone. Welcome to the February 21st, 2023 joint public information session between the townships of Lopatcong and Powhatan. If everyone would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided, indicating the time and place of the meeting in accordance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975 by advertising a notice in the Star Ledger and the Express Times Warren County Zone, and by posting a copy on the bulletin board in the municipal building. So tonight is I think it's the second session for the amended petition for the plan conformance for the amended center boundaries. George Ritter right in front of me, and to my left is Jim Kyle. They'll make the presentation, and then anyone who wishes to make a public comment, each speaker can be recognized and come to the podium with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. So, would you like to get started?
Well, thank you for coming tonight. The purpose of this meeting, thank you for coming. The purpose in having the meeting tonight is to really have an open session to discuss really the redevelopment plan for the old Phillipsburg Mall, as well as the studies that have gone into doing and proposing an amended center application to the Highlands. And we'd like to go through the various proposals in town and also discuss some of the reasoning behind it, and then open it to questions, concerns that any of you may have with where we are in the process. So at that point, Jim, do you want to start with your side, or? Okay, if you basically click back to the, basically the center designation, I'll give a quick overview because it's, that should be up to, that should be sheet 4. Oops, that's not 4. Keep going back. That's 4. The part of the process that, could you go full screen?
There you go. I'm with you.
Okay. Part of the process that's involved in developing the redevelopment plan for the mall, the old Phillipsburg Mall, also involves having an amendment to both Powhatan Township and Lopatcong Township's center designation areas. And what that is that through the years, the townships have developed, with the approval of the Highlands, what portions of the townships that they would like to see development occur within. It's also the area that is currently either has available or can have extended to various infrastructure systems such as sewer and water service. The issue that came up and what brought part of this project back in front of the Highlands is that, and most of you are pretty familiar with this, but nothing like now it dies. All right. Essentially, the area that's under discussion is the Phillipsburg Mall, the area behind the Phillipsburg Mall, partially in Lopatcong and Powhatan Township, as well as a second site that's being proposed for affordable housing in Powhatan Township, which is located in this area of the township. But as you can see, the green area is the area that's already within the Highlands designated centers. And that involves both the town of Phillipsburg, Lopatcong Township, Powhatan, and Alphaborough. Then to give you a sense of scale, the area in green there is a little over 4,000 acres that have been included in a designated center. What you can see is, and I can't give you the reason for this in terms of how this occurred, but the area behind the Phillipsburg Mall, the lots that are directly behind the Phillipsburg Mall, were never included in any of the center designations, even though they are totally surrounded by center, nor was the site being proposed for the affordable housing tract in Cohacton included in the center. So the request that's going before the Highlands is to merge essentially the two pieces behind the mall, as well as there's some single-family homes along Lock Street, about 9 properties, into the center in this area, and then to add into that the one additional site for the affordable housing property in Cohacton Township itself. That brought us to an exercise of having to go through and explain reasons why we think these sites would be appropriate to be incorporated into the center, the growth area of the towns, but also to develop a plan that is sensitive to the environmental impacts of developing these sites. In other words, how do they fit in terms of the Highlands protection of various natural resources and protection of the watersheds within which the construction could possibly take place, and how we were going to fit that within the Highlands goals and objectives. So there's been 2 documents put together for it. The one document, which has been on file at the township, is really a fairly lengthy document on the center itself and basically how we think that this fits within the criteria of the Highlands and why it should be incorporated into the center. And then a second outgrowth of that, which brings us to how these parcels might be developed, was the redevelopment plan for the Phillipsburg Mall and the area behind it, which is actually a separate document, looking at how they might be developed and also how the design standards for the redevelopment plan fits within the Highlands model for protecting various resources that might be on the properties. And in this case, particularly the piece that is behind the mall and is currently a farm field area and basically is bordered by Lopatcong Creek and has an extensive amount of wetlands and forest cover over it. So that's really how we got here. The proposal for the front of the mall, as I said, is already within the developed area, Highland developed area, and really requires no Highlands review. And that may proceed basically through the redevelopment plan and procedures that have been laid out for that. The area behind, which is really one of the things we're going to discuss tonight, is the properties behind the mall and how the redevelopment plan is addressed, fitting those into the Highlands goals and objectives and what we think are appropriate development scenarios for the rear of the property. I don't know if you can go to the rear of the property. It would be sheet 4, I think it is, of the first set. No, go back to the site plan. And then just sheet 4 out of that. Yes, this, just to give a little overview, is this, okay.
Hold on, I'll go back.
No, that's all right. As you,
It's true. Hold on.
they, basically, as all of you are, most of you are aware, the Phillipsburg Mall itself, which has existed for many, many years, sits on this front half of the property, in that general area, and the open farm field sits to the rear. As I said, the front piece is basically being proposed to be developed as a joint project between the Lopatcong and Cohacton to be redeveloped for a warehouse facility. And the plan itself has been developed for a single building, sitting on the road frontage, basically with a design that is to protect and save the essential commercial uses along the road that exist today, the Chick-fil-A, the Taco Bell, maintain those, and then behind the entrance road, develop a new warehouse structure where currently today is the old mall and the parking area. Further to the rear of that is where the second warehouse building is being proposed to occupy the open ground to the rear on a site that's approximately a little over 81 acres behind the mall itself. In terms of procedure, the project is a large building in the front, which is around 842,000 square feet of warehouse, has moved through the redevelopment process to the point that it has received conceptual approval from the Lopatcong Township Council. At this stage in the development, that's where it stands. It has sketch plan approval, and the applicants or the redevelopers are now in the process of refining and developing the actual drawings themselves, and we'll begin the site planning process, which is a normal process we go through for preliminary and final site plan approval before the township's planning board. The rear part of the project is still in conceptual form. It has not progressed any further than that at this stage. As I say, that's really one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight and focus on is the rear portion of the property. What is being proposed in the rear on the 81 acres is approximately 568,000 square foot warehouse on 81 acres. The aspects of the site, some of the goals within the redevelopment plan were to make a very sharp distinction between the redevelopment of the mall, which has already been disturbed, built, and mostly paved, and the development that takes place on the back, which is basically open and undeveloped agricultural and wooded areas to the rear, and to make a clean distinction between those and try to balance the intensity of development based on the environmental factors that are there. The front part of the project is being developed essentially similar to other warehouse developments in our community. That is to say that we're looking at potential of up to 65% impervious cover. We're looking at a possible building coverage of 30%, which is very consistent with what has been approved and developed in Lopatcong Township over the years, but is in fact less intense than what is out there today. So the plan is proceeding to be developed there. The one thing that has been changed is that the old Friendlies that is on the corner is going to be removed, taken down, and that site cleared and basically converted back to green space in the development. The basic other aspect of this that should be realized is that to get to this point, there has been various studies done. There's been various traffic studies done on both the front and back, looking at the potential impact of proceeding in this direction. And what has been found is that the existing traffic configurations on Route 22, the entrances and exits to this property are adequate for the development that's being proposed here, both for both buildings, both the front and back, and that they do not exceed the traffic volumes and intensity development that was there when the mall was fully operational. So if this is to go forward, there would not be the need for any improvements really to 22 or to the entrances and exits, though there will be further traffic studies done to improve timing at the intersections in terms of timing of the lights, and there may be improvements necessary for turning radiuses and that type of thing within the secondary road to make sure it can handle traffic that's coming in. I think that's a quick overview of the front piece. The rear part, as I said, and I think if we look at How about sheet 9?
Oh, this one.
No, of our.
Which one is that first?
That's the steep slope. One of the things that was done in developing this plan was to look at some of the environmental criteria, which is not only important to the development of the site, but it's also important in meeting some of the goals and objectives of the Highlands in terms of preservation of watersheds, critically infiltration areas. And what this looks at, it very briefly defines, essentially the easiest way to think of this is the Lopatcong stream corridor. The blue areas on it are essentially the areas associated with wetlands buffers, riparian buffers associated with the stream corridor itself. And what you can see is that there's a significant band of these that actually impact the edge of the property, bordering the creek, and then there's a tributary that actually runs up the Lopatcong side, which pulls wetlands up in, well, not wetlands, but essentially riparian corridors and buffers up into the area joining Lopatcong. What it leaves is a relatively small area of the site in the center that is relatively unrestricted and potentially available for development. The approach that was taken in the redevelopment plan was to concentrate as much of our development as close to the mall as we could. In other words, to pull it up on the site and to protect as much of the natural corridor that exists surrounding the site. And that's exactly what the redevelopers has proposed. The building itself is going to essentially sit on the open ground that's next to the site, and the remainder of the tract is going to be basically revegetated and put back into grasslands and reforested to reestablish the creek corridor dimensions and essentially infill all the area on the lower portion of the site. And what that has done is produced a plan that's going to have approximately, get the right number. Out of the site's 81 acres, about 63 acres, or about 78% of the tract is going to be set aside for open space uses, and that the total impervious cover, that's the building, all the parking, all the loading docks, everything that goes with it, is going to be about 21.4% of the site, which is obviously a far cry from what we have seen in town for development over the years. It should be pointed out that all our commercial districts in town, all of our business districts in town have impervious covers between 60 and 65%. All of our residential areas have coverages allowed up to 40 and 50% of their districts. The most restrictive residential district in town has a maximum of 20%, which basically says that the overall intensity of this development is very similar to what we would permit in our most restrictive residential district with a coverage of 20%. The other thing that was looked at was really, since the area is in agriculture, why can't it simply be left as a farm? Well, one of the concerns there is that this is still private property, and they still have the ability to develop, and the site has been zoned for years as an age-restricted housing site. And basically that district allowed impervious cover of 50% on the tract if it was developed and didn't have the controls that we're going to have in the redevelopment plan to confine development to a very small area of the site. So the end product in terms of going to the Highlands is that the design is compact, it's relatively low density, and we're going to protect the forested areas of the site. Maybe we can go back to sheet back to the first sheet.
The concept.
Yeah, the concept plan. We're essentially going to protect all the existing forested land that borders the site, all the existing forested land that exists along the stream corridor, as well as the forested portion of the site that comes up through Lopatcong Township. In addition, we're going to set aside areas for reforestation and redevelopment that is currently farm field and revegetated and put into grasslands and reforested. And in addition, we're going to set up what is called a HERS, an environmental district that the Highlands has, so that at least 35 acres of the tract will be put in a permanent open space easement that will prevent any future development at all in the site. So we think that there's a very good fit between this project and the site itself, and that there's been a very honest effort made to protect those resources. And from a purely circulation and planning situation, as you can see here, all the traffic, all the truck traffic will basically circulate back through the front portion of the track and out on the 22. There is no interconnection of either of these two buildings with the residential areas, Lock Street, or anything else. It's all internalized, all coming back to 22. So we think it's a good fit, and we think it's something that's well worth considering. And we think it's also a sensitive proposal in terms of how the site exists today and the features that are on the site. And I think that's a summary of what we're trying to do, and open it up to any questions on this piece, and then we can look to the smaller piece, the affordable housing tract in Lopatcong, if there's any interest. Yes.
What's not clear to me is where is.
Can I have your name,
Oh,
please?
sure. Tim Tennant,
Spell your last name
T as in Tom, E-N-N-A-N-T,
and your address.
4 Foxwood Lane.
4.
Can you please explain where the trucks are going to leave here and how you are protecting the current retail space? Because
Well,
that's not clear.
there's a series of, the idea was to develop a series of circulation that tends to separate commercial traffic from warehouse traffic from residential. So the way the site is laid out, and some of you may know this, some don't, but essentially the intersection on 22 today serves to not only provide vehicular access to what was the mall and the freestanding commercial development along the mall, but it also provided a back door to Sycamore Landing. That you could actually come in here and drive a loop road back and actually come into the back side of Sycamore Landing, giving them a way to get to a traffic light so they could make a turn without having to go all the way back in town. What is done in this plan is that the access to Sycamore Landing is broken off and actually separated from the traffic, so the residential traffic moves on its independent road and continues to maintain access to the apartment project itself. Internally, what is done is that as people come off of 22 and enter the site, the segments of the road running along the back here is essentially isolated from the truck traffic. And there's a separate, totally independent system that will provide the loop for truck traffic to move through the site, move around. Truck traffic can flow out and go into the right in, right out here. Or if they wish, when they come off at 22, they actually come out and will go straight across the median here, this drive, and enter the truck loop and then be able to circulate to the rear. So that there's a system in here to minimize the conflict between any trucks and the existing commercial area.
Can I ask ask a follow-up question? I don't mean to interrupt you,
No,
but
that's all right.
are you saying that the same light that I turn at today to go to Chick-fil-A or Starbucks, I'm gonna now share with the loop-in trucks around that warehouse?
Yes, but it will be, it's going to be retimed and redesigned. The traffic guys are looking at it.
So you can understand, if I worked for Starbucks or Chick-fil-A, my concern to to share that, because it's difficult already to do that. I appreciate that this is an open session planning, but
Well, no, it is.
the
That's why we're here.
business district should be just as important as that business. So it's not clear to me,
Well,
even the
traffic,
physical space of the room.
yeah, well, the way this is going to be designed, the traffic engineer, truthfully, at the here can probably explain it even better than me. But essentially, the timing is going to work. There's going to be a new traffic light installed on the interior loop road. And the
Like where
idea,
Starbucks is now, like that light, that specific light? Because that's like the size of the truck. Just trying to be clear, just trying to understand.
that basically, they're going to split the truck traffic so that one lane will move through, and then there'll be a turning lane for passenger vehicles, and the lights will be timed so that this area always clears. So that basically, they can basically have a free flow of movement through there. People that want to go to the fast food places and move in and move down while trucks are actually moving across. And they're working on the timing of this and installing a new light on the interior to accomplish that. It's a concern that the township has had and people that have looked at this. And it's something that's going to be resolved as part of the site planning process, but there is a solution out there, and basically it comes down to how the lights are timed and how they split the traffic. But the intent is to keep truck traffic off of this stretch and basically pull them into a completely new loop road system within the development and free from the commercial area.
Judy has a question. Did you want to do your presentation and then have people come up, or do you want a session to be operated like this where they can just, interrupt you?
I don't mind.
You don't care?
I don't mind
Okay.
answering. Hey, why
Okay.
not? It's on your mind, you might as well go for it.
All right, then we can recognize Judy Liptak. She has a question.
Yes, so it's a two-part question. When you know where Panera is, right? You put your finger on where Panera is, right? So trucks are gonna come down that long side, you have that green right there, that thin piece of green property that goes all the way back.
On the right.
Yep, there you go, all the way back. They're all homes. Those people have lived there for decades. Now, they're gonna have trucks. Now, I appreciate the greenery that you have there. It's seasonal, all the leaves are down now, so it's all visible. So now these people are gonna be hanging in their backyards, they're gonna have trucks going 24/7, right past their homes. They've lived there for years, that's not fair to them. I hope the plan will consist of more green space there with berms and maybe sound walls, so the people who live there for decades are not gonna be bothered by tractor trailers. I won't even get into the pollution that they're gonna have to tolerate, but just having to see and hear tractor trailers is quite devastating to people who live there for decades. This is a blue-collar neighborhood. There are laborers that live in that neighborhood. There are old folks that live in that neighborhood. It is not fair to them. So I hope that the feedback would be that they're gonna protect that neighborhood somehow, because it really isn't fair to them.
Well,
How loud is a tractor trailer at 5 miles an
Oh,
hour?
we're not,
It's not.
Hold on.
So my second question is, most warehouses, take painstaking, however they figure out their traffic studies, and they make sure that the employee cars and the trucks don't go in and out the same way, right? The ones on Straker's Road, you have an employee, it's well labeled, employees in and out here, trucks there. We're not only not doing that, we're allowing the public, we're listing the safety of the public, and we're mixing cars from the public that are visiting Kohl's and any of those restaurants in the front, and tractor trailers. We're mingling that. Has there ever been any studies done on, or any warehouses that you are aware of that currently have a situation where we're mingling public and trucks together on the same roads, in the same entrances? And how did that work out?
Well, there's many towns that have mixed traffic flows, on the.
Onto a site, onto a warehouse site though. This is like a warehouse site.
Yes.
And how does that work out?
They're not, as far as I know, there isn't any particular problem with it. I think your questions about buffering, about landscaping, about what has to be added, is clearly something that can be discussed as part of a planning thing and a planning effort to put it in. The redevelopment plan, Jim can jump in here for Blackhawk since that's his side of the line, but we have extensive landscaping in it. The board also has extensive control over asking for and adding things to, if they feel it's appropriate, that diminish views, noise, etc. For example, since this doesn't deal with the back, the applicants are putting up basically walls running around through these sites to actually cut off all the headlight spillage to reduce noise and to provide a demarcation between themselves and the commercial activities that take place out there. There's no reason that can't, if there's issues of inadequate screening, say that it all falls off because it's all deciduous, clearly as part of the planning process, you can talk about and consider putting landscaping to provide those or berms or walls. So I think that's can be addressed. The other thing to remember is this is right in, right out. It's not all the traffic. Obviously, people want to turn left, which actually I think is a very low percentage, because most people are going to want to go back.
Right, that goes out to 78.
Yeah,
Right, we're gonna go that
a
way.
little over a mile and a tenth there. But what I'm saying is that some of the traffic will actually be making the left going back, but it's a small percentage. The thought here is that this would provide the primary way to get down to the interchange. But I think those complaints are something that can clearly be generated and reviewed as part of a process like any development in terms of landscaping that comes before your board and can be addressed. And I think that those issues can be, and there is area to plant. It's not like it's nothing, no room to do anything along that.
Can I ask in the subsequent question, or follow-up question? When they're coming out on that side on the right now it's a stop sign and not a light. If I'm following your little yellow circle thing, so there is like a light onto 22, and then coming out currently it's a stop sign. Where the little buffer is on the right side where she mentioned the houses, yeah, right there.
Right there.
Would there be a light there, or is that plan going to continue to be the stop sign? Because I'd like to go to the bud shop, and I wouldn't be able to get to the bud shop the way that the traffic pattern is today. So, and the new bagel store. If I want to go to the bagel store, will there be a light for the trucks to come there, or?
I can't answer that for you today. I think the developer hasn't, I haven't.
Well, either way.
Discuss that.
Right.
That'll be partially some of the stuff that has to be addressed as part of the preliminary site plan approval. I don't recall any discussion of how that was going to be handled, whether it was going to be a light or a stop sign.
Okay, thank you.
Hilton and stop are two different things, okay?
Okay, it's just a point.
Let's just do one at a time. We're trying to record this. Sir,
You're welcome.
did you want to?
I thought he was pointing at somebody else. I don't want to skip that.
No, go ahead.
Joe Calucci, 1500 Broad Street, Bloomfield, New Jersey. I'm a representative. I was born and raised in, not that I got to explain to her, but I was born at Warren Hospital. I lived in Harmony. A couple of years ago, I sold my property over there. That's no concern, but I was going to say, I worked at the Phillipsburg Mall when they built it, and there was a lot of traffic at that mall. I used to go to Duke's Pub like a lot of people in here probably did, so there was always a traffic, and they never had no problem. So getting trucks in and out there, I don't see a problem. And the mall, sir, isn't the mall falling apart?
Well, yes, that's why there's a redevelopment plan being proposed right now. The mall, for all intents and purposes, has collapsed. And it's essentially vacant right now. And both Lopatcong and Lopatcong are proceeding with a redevelopment plan to try to get that property back as a viable use in town.
Yeah, good luck.
Anybody else on this particular question? Yes, sir.
Brian Jerling, 276 North Prospect Street. Couple questions, couple comments. All my concerns or questions are about the farmland, the two lots there. Does that warehouse parking lot, stormwater basin, does that overlap with the prime groundwater recharge area?
No. This is not on any of the critical recharge area that the Highlands has identified. Most of that critical area, all of it falls within what's going to be the protected area of the site.
Okay.
We're not on top of any of that. And as I say, one of the things that is going to happen here is that the area right now is what I call low-value agriculture. That doesn't mean it isn't green, it is. But one of the things that will occur here is that a good percentage of what is now agriculture that is plowed, maintained, fertilized, is basically going to be put back into grasslands and then reforested and basically become more stable and a better infiltration area than what's out there today. So I think there will be a significant improvement there. And as to the value of agriculture, just to give you a feel of this, there's about, I remember the numbers right, there's roughly 32 acres of tillable ground in Lopatcong. The remainder of the site is either steep slopes, wetlands, forested area. But interestingly enough, is that the Warren County Agricultural Board excluded Lopatcong Township from any agriculture development area. And they basically decided that the township was too intensely developed to support viable long-term agriculture, so that they do not actively seek to have properties added into their agricultural land bank. And just as an aside, this site is so isolated from everything that it can't be part of a larger agricultural region, even if we want it. It's essentially developed on one edge, has the industrial park in Phillipsburg on the other, housing to the site, and of course what was developed down 22. So it will always be an isolated piece of ground and will not lend itself to any type of long-term agriculture. So there has to be some type of productive use found on this site in the long term to make it work. And our thought was it would be far better to revegetate this area, put it back in the woods, a good portion of it. It would be better for the maintenance of the stream corridor, for maintaining water quality and infiltration to do that, than it would be to basically continue it in extensive agriculture and eventually just have that completely struggle to survive. I think it would always be second class agriculture. So we think this is actually a better solution to maintaining the land and protecting the resource than if it was just to remain as it is today in marginal agriculture. Yeah.
Were there other types of development considered other than warehouses?
Yes, we
What
did
else?
at the beginning of this project, we did.
Like what? Like what?
Well, truthfully, one of the thoughts was to develop a mixed commercial residential parks.
On that farmland or the mall?
Both.
Right.
We were thinking that might be one possibility, to go ahead and develop that type of thing on this site. Unfortunately, and also to provide affordable housing within that project was one of the thoughts we had.
So when was that thought about? Was that
Well,
thought
it was
about?
very on in the process, that's probably a year ago.
It's not more.
Yeah, it was more, it was at least a year ago that was discussed. There was also discussions about, well, maybe it could be some other type of commercial other than a mall. There was talk about, could it be an office use or something like that, or maybe some other type of business where, industrial manufacturing use.
I think we also talked about commercial recreation.
Commercial recreation.
Possibility. You know, that was one of the points you brought up at the first meeting was, or maybe it wasn't you, somebody brought up, you know, community-based uses that people could, you know, utilize. But the problem is that we found in talking that through, there's just not enough population in this area to support that from a market perspective. So nobody would take the bite and invest in a facility like that because they were afraid that it wouldn't survive.
So we're too dense of a population to keep it as farm agriculture, but we're not dense enough to make it a mixed-use recreational share. So we fall in between
It's a fine line.
for a warehouse.
You know, when the county looks at it, you know, and we talked about this at the first meeting, if you look outside of the center, particularly in Lopatcong Township, we have significant preserved farmland and open space. And that's essentially coincides with the Highlands Preservation Area in the township, and it's significant.
Yeah.
So as we look at that, there's not a density of agriculture in this area, as George said. I mean, you basically have an isolated 80-acre piece of property with no other farmland around it. Really what the county is focused on is preserving large swaths of agriculture together, as opposed to just, you know, little isolated areas. Housing was also, again, not just in the context of mixed use, but housing was also discussed. The problem is, the only way to get to the rear of the property is through the mall. So, you know, it's not real desirable to, you know, have to do that. Whereas Sycamore Landing has frontage on 22 and other access, there's no other access that's available to this property from the neighborhoods that surround it because of the environmental constraints of the two creeks that run, you know, basically on either side of this parcel. So we did run through a bunch of different scenarios. Commercial, you know, the back piece is not real desirable. Every retailer wants, I need to be seen from the highway, people need to see my parking. You're not going to get any commercial use that's going to survive on that track. So residential and commercial were tough. Again, I think we talked about it many times, trying to come up with a reasonable solution.
You said we. Who did we when that discussion happened?
We, the townships, as George and I went through this exercise, talking with our governing bodies
Right.
and our planning
Because I've
boards.
been to a lot of the LoPat meetings, kind of waiting to hear these discussions, and I don't remember ever talking about options. That's why I wondered if they were actually, and who discussed it.
Yeah, they
Because we
were,
didn't discuss it, they didn't discuss it in council.
Right.
Unless it was in closed sessions. But was it an open session that they ever discussed options for that space?
A lot at all.
So when you say we, I was just wondering who we were, who the we is.
John?
John Christensen, 38 J Lane. When you guys decided that warehousing would be the best option, was this during like the pandemic years when everybody was shopping from home? Or was it after that when people were starting to go out again and looking to go to shopping centers to do their shopping and, you know, instead of using everything online?
it was kind of halfway through, I would say. So we weren't kind of where we are now, but it was still, you know, prevalent, we'll say.
So it'd be before 21, after 21?
I mean, gosh, we've been talking about this since 2019, 2020, not specifically warehouse, but just the idea of redeveloping these properties. So we've been talking about this probably for a good three years.
And how regularly do you update the town council on that? If you've been discussing it for 3 years, how often do you, like, update council and then discuss it openly?
I don't know. that there's
3 years ago, I wasn't going to meetings, so I just wondered.
Well, it's been, I don't know that, so some of the meetings were more informal. It wasn't with the whole governing body. We might have had 2 representatives from the governing body and maybe 2 from the planning board. It was almost a subcommittee type arrangement. Yeah, so which is common, you know, for issues like this. So,
I would think they would report to the general council at that point.
well, the governing body members that were part of the subcommittee would
Yeah.
report back to
Okay.
the committee members, council members, excuse me.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have referenced the county and that it's from an agricultural standpoint, it's not really their priority, but from a regional and state perspective, the Highlands Council rates that as prime agricultural land and of high priority for preservation. So is that figured into the reasoning that this seems to be preferable?
Well, I think it's figured into our plan to the extent that we are going to sustain and preserve a significant portion of this land resource. That is to say, we're not going to put it under buildings and pavement. We're going to save about 70-some% of the site. And we're going to preserve the land resource by revegetating and turning it back into forest land. From the standpoint of agriculture, it is, as much of these areas that are now covered with housing was agricultural land at one time. But the real issue here from an agricultural standpoint is that it's very unlikely that this can stand on its own. Usually agriculture, as indicated by Jim, it's a business that basically needs mass. It needs to have a lot of farmland in places so that business can be conducted and that support industries can grow up around it. This site is something that is not related and cannot be related to ongoing agricultural activities. It is, from a farming standpoint, an isolated piece of ground between two stream valleys, and over the years has really become isolated by the development that occurs around it. So there's very little potential for it to ever be viable a business of agriculture on this site. So we thought that preserving the land resource and putting it back into forest, improving the soil condition, encouraging infiltration is a good step in the right direction. And it would help to protect what is really the natural resources out here, and that's the stream corridors. That's what's really left around this site.
What about solar? Do they consider solar? That just seems like a perfect spot for solar.
Well, personally, that is not something that was discussed in our standpoint with solar, no.
Since we're taking solar down on strikers, we don't have any other solar, that would be,
Well, if you built the warehouse, put a blueberry farm on top of it.
Well,
I'm not trying to be a wise guy. I'm not.
the solar on strikers, I believe the intent is to move a good piece of that over to the roof of the new building.
Right.
That's what it's gonna happen, it's going on the roof in the parking garage.
So it'll be
Your
a
name,
smaller-
sir?
it'll be small.
Your name?
Mike Paulsonelli. I'm president of Warren County Building Trades. I've been in construction since the 60s.
Address, please.
At 16 Delaware Road, I represent 3,500 union construction workers in Warren County. In the state, 150,000 union construction workers. We developed Ingersoll Rand. The amount of jobs and tax revenue that came into the two towns, because it's bordering, is phenomenal.
Excuse me, is this a state question?
Yes. The Phillipsburg Mall's been empty. The only thing I think is in it now is Kohl's. I mean, I've been in it. It's actually fallen down. They had to demolish some of it. So that's basically gonna be redeveloped. The piece behind it, I believe you did say in the beginning, it was a zone for senior housing, correct?
It was.
At one time?
It still
Or
is.
still is.
Still is.
So, I mean, to do solar, the problem with doing solar on that piece, the power company can't handle the solar back into the grid. We just did solar at Uniglow, that's the big warehouse right against 22. We had to take half of it offline because the power company can't handle it coming back into the grid right now. So, there's a lot of obstacles with the solar right now. Unless you have a grid tie or you use the solar for your own facility, there's a lot of issues getting worked out.
The answer, I guess, the short answer for where we are in this process is that neither of these buildings have proposed solar.
However,
However,
Under
the
state law.
yes, thank you, you got
They
it.
have to design the building to be able to put the
Carry it.
panels on the roof. Whether, they don't have to do it, but it has to be structurally capable of having solar installed on the roof. That was passed a year or two ago.
Yeah, and again, that doesn't directly relate to what we're talking about here tonight, but all these facilities will have to provide EV parking, recharging stations. That's all part of state regulation now, and these will have to conform. And in that sense, any other questions then?
Donna Schneider, 26 Meadowview. You know, when you were first talking, George, to the township about redevelopment plans for that area, I attended those meetings and I asked if the public was going to be involved in the decision-making of what is to go on those properties. And the former council president said, yes, there were going to be, he wanted to have 11 meetings, make sure the public were aware of it, to come here and give input. And that never happened. Can you, do you have any reason or answer why that never happened when we're presented with something that's already there now?
I can't speak to that. The only thing I can speak to is that both the planning board held public hearings on the redevelopment plan, council did. No.
That's not,
No.
That's
Absolutely
not true.
Well, they approved the plan.
Council approved the plan
yeah.
in October, so we're
Well,
having
no,
this
when I
meeting.
said the redevelopment plan, I'm referring to the plan that established the mall in this area as an area in need of redevelopment. That was heard before the plan, which
Right.
forwarded those recommendations to council, who then adopted that area as an area in need of redevelopment. That was the step that got the process started. And they
Correct.
held hearings.
Yes, I was there.
Okay.
But then it was supposed to be, okay, now you've deemed it an area in need of redevelopment. Now we're gonna see what the public wants as input, and get some input from the public as to what they would like to see there, and that never happened.
Well, that I can't speak to. I will speak to the fact, though, that the redevelopment plan was sent up to council, and they did have a hearing on it.
Not-
I mean, that's as far as I can go with it.
Yes, but before that, it was supposed to be discussions, letting, it's in the minutes, letting the public know that these lands were deemed in need of redevelopment, and that the public would have a chance to come in and offer what they wanted. Not just to say, we're passing this and that's it. So you were here when that occurred, so I'm just.
Well, I know I was here for the problem. I don't think I was at the meeting that you're referring to, at least I don't recall.
Yeah, you were, because it was a planning board meeting, and you were talking about the plans over there.
Okay, I'll stand corrected if I want.
Former council president made clear that's what he wanted.
Well, I think one of the things that, I can't answer that, why it was not covered that way. It was covered in a public hearing, but not in the depth you're referring
Exactly.
to. Yes.
What happens if one town approves it and the other town does not? Is there a mitigation plan or?
Well,
You mean as far as the site plan?
the site plan,
Correct, because I was at the Cohacton meeting a couple weeks ago, and I was under the impression that both towns had to pass some of these plans, and maybe it was just into the spot below, that's in the Highlands area, that you're asking for, I guess, waiver or approval to change what was that farmland space. I'm just curious,
No.
like, what's the process?
both site plans require the cooperation of both towns. In other words, both town councils have to approve the part of the plan that's in their jurisdiction. In other words, here's the line.
Oh, that's helpful, thank you.
So basically, Lopatcong regulations deal with that side of the line. Cohack deals with this side, and they have to agree that if they don't, well, then the plans have to be modified and changed, because obviously you can't have the building going across the township line. The answer to your question is, they both have jurisdiction.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Yes.
Could
you say?
Could I have your name and address?
Susan Sika,
Spell your last name.
SICK, 642 Grant Street in Alpha. Can you say perhaps a little bit more about, you mentioned at the beginning that the traffic study was based on, or reference the fact that both the mall being completely the same traffic that would
Basically operating.
operating.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for. But at the time when the Alpha, the mall would be operating, we didn't have either the development on land, the development on strikers, or the developments, but the two warehouses that are coming to Alpha proper itself, plus others. My question to you, and you may not know the answer to this, and I gather from, if something is proposed, you can't necessarily compare it to something that hasn't been approved. So it's, so you're, if another construction has not been, a site has not been approved, your traffic study may not include that. What do you foresee is going to happen in terms of the traffic on Route 22? In terms of the arteries, and I'm specifically concerned about turnarounds and the amount of from the point where you get off on 78 to make a left-hand turn, you have 2 lights or is it 3 lights? You have to now travel several lanes over and so forth. And you've got truck traffic coming from multiple directions to multiple sites. And then, and also just for a point of clarification, I think you asked, these warehouses are being built on spec. At this point, there's no tenant?
We don't know.
We don't know. I think that's a fair assumption. We don't know though, whether it's being built for someone or spec.
Okay. But if you could talk more about what, because, and what the approval process will be for widening, for turn lanes, for lights, for all of that that's going to happen.
Yeah, our standard really is that the traffic report has to show, and the DOT is going to require this too, that there's no degradation to existing levels of service on Route 22. And if there is, then the applicant, the redeveloper, has to come up with a plan to address that. As George had said, there's definitely going to be some retiming of the signal that comes into the property from Route 22 to accommodate, the slower movements of trucks. Their opinion was that there's adequate stacking in that 2-lane left turn lane into the site. And I think despite what a lot of people think, Ingersoll Rand, I think the total is 3.8 million square feet, somewhere thereabouts. These projects, at least based on the traffic information we've seen, it's not trucks one after the other coming in and going out. And I think a lot of people's perception is just that. This pales in comparison to the Ingersoll Rand site. So this is about, it's 850 and 5, so it's about 1.3 or 1.4 million. So it's about a third, maybe a little more than a third.
Correct, sir, but the Ingersoll Rand is just the next light.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying in terms of the information that has to be provided at the time of site plan approval, not just to the local boards, but also the DOT, because the DOT has jurisdiction over 22. They're gonna have to show that there's no degradation to levels of service, or that if there is, it's only slight.
Just so for your own information, the proposed redevelopers of the front and back have already submitted a preliminary traffic information to NJ DOT and has received conceptual approval for basically maintaining the intersections the way they are with minor improvements to signalization and that type of thing. And it is attached to the back of our report. It is in here. So that process has started. It's not complete, it's not finished. There's probably going to be some changes, but the state has already tentatively reviewed it and came to the conclusion that the traffic impacts on 22 will be less, I noticed, I believe, less than when the mall was in full operation.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? The county was here this past 2 weeks talking about traffic in our community at the county level? Or is this grandfathered in before all of their announcements, or is that new politicians? It was in the newspaper, I could show you a picture. They were like,
You're talking about the commissioners?
yes. So I didn't know if that was in line with this, or is that something different?
Well, since this is a state highway, 22, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is correct. The state, when they evaluate a redevelopment plan or a project on a site that has already been developed in the past, they tend to look at what the maximum level of impact was when that site was fully operational. And then they evaluate the new project against that to see if it needs improvements. And in this case, the state went through the study and concluded that these two warehouses will not have a significant impact on 22 that warrants changes in the design that's out there.
Thank you for explaining, I appreciate that. So, if it's a spec warehouse, or warehouses, we've learned in Lopatcong that when it's a spec, you can have somebody like the US Post Office move in and wreak havoc. And I could probably bet you the traffic study that was done on that warehouse and the traffic study with the US Post Office in that warehouse are two different things. So how does this township say yes to something like that, not knowing who is going in there, when there will be trucks in and out all day long, just like the US Post Office on straight trucks?
Well,
So I think the thing is, if, right now, the redevelopers have presented a specific type of warehouse use. If a different tenant comes that has different impacts, they have to come back to both townships and address that, and particularly the DOT, because like your example of the mail, and I'll give you an example of this. It was the business park, Warren Business Park in Powhatan. They initially came in for approval of a warehouse on that site as what we call a high cube warehouse, which is a storage, more trucks than cars. They came back and got approval for a last mile distribution center, which is more cars and small vans than trucks. So they had to come back to the board and present that information again to make sure that everything that was proposed in the plan was going to address the impacts. And it'll be the same here. If all of a sudden some really intense user goes in there, so these will never be last mile distribution centers. They don't have enough passenger vehicle parking to support that use. So you won't see, delivery vans en masse leaving, coming, going to the site, all that. That won't happen here because they don't have the car parking to support it. So it'll probably be more like a standard, where storage and distribution use.
So the state set out plans to help towns with the development of warehouses.
Right.
And they designated different types of warehouses. So you have your high volume, your cube.
right.
So a town can say, this area can only take this type of warehouse.
Right.
Have we decided that here to say, so that we can make sure we don't have those other high volume mail distribution centers that are
Yeah, so the way that these are designed is for the more standard type of storage and distribution, not, intense last mile or even like a mail distribution facility, something like
or
that.
the stacked ones, right?
Or the what?
The stacked ones, what do they call those?
High cube.
The cubes.
Cubes proposal.
Where
No,
the,
it's called the cube, so.
yeah, the cubes, but there is another model, right, where it's a couple stories, so instead of expanding out, you go up.
Right, and
We're not
really,
looking at that here, are we?
Well, many of those that go to the computerized loading storage also has very low employment.
right.
I mean, the Amazon fulfillment centers, for example, can't fit in these warehouses. There just isn't physically enough parking.
Right.
They couldn't, and also the warehouse in the back is only loaded on one side anyhow. It's not going to have double bays.
So what designation would that be in these
Well, I
warehouses?
think, my reaction is these are general, what I call a general warehouses.
More storage?
Mostly storage and that type of thing, not pick and pack or that kind of thing at all.
We don't know
I don't
that.
really know that.
Well, no, but there's more time going on. I mean, one of the things is that, again, as part of this process, they have to go through the same planning process that every development that comes before the town. There's going to be a preliminary site plan, public hearings on that, there's going to be a final site plan. So there's additional time to ask questions and get answers, and also to have the boards attach what they believe. If they see something, they can attach conditions.
Yeah, going through this as a redevelopment process so the redeveloper will have an agreement with the township, almost like a developer's agreement, where they're stipulating to certain things in that agreement. So not only does the planning board have leeway in the approval process, but the governing body does through the redevelopment agreement as well.
Will these be pilot, or are they going to generate ratables, traditional ratables?
So they're in a redevelopment area. A pilot can be used here if desired, but it's not a guarantee. There has to be a financial agreement. In most cases, not most cases, all cases, the townships are not going to approve a pilot if it's not more beneficial to the taxpayers than it would be regular taxation. So they have to submit a financial proposal that's reviewed by the governing body and approved. And part of that analysis, it's like a fiscal impact analysis, that it details the structure of the pilot over the 30 years. So it's not guaranteed. It has to be agreed to by the governing bodies of both towns. But much more beneficial to the community as a pilot from a tax perspective.
Ryan?
So for that 81 acres, once you hit 8, 10, 11% impervious cover, you're already impacting water quality. So while you can say it's better than residential, other commercial areas that were built before we knew any better, I guess I have an issue with you saying that this is going to be the best thing for the resource, as though the choices are farm, senior living, or warehouse. There are a variety of pathways for landowner to sell their development rights to the state or some entity and preserve it through Green Acres program, fish and wildlife management area for fishing and hunting. You got creek frontage at the back of the lot there in Lopatcong. So I guess my question is it possible, you foresee a possibility where you build the warehouse at the mall where, to me it makes perfectly good sense to do so, reuse land that's already been impacted, and then maybe for the community of Bowen, have a road that goes back there that provides public access, and try to work with the state to take ownership of it and provide access for fishing and hiking, things like that. I mean, is it too late in the game for that? Is that a possible pathway for use of that back lot?
Well, I think like with all those agricultural programs, it requires cooperation of the landowner.
Right.
He wants to go into that type of setting, and he has to perceive it as being more beneficial than some other alternatives.
Sure, but my question is, like, at this stage in the game, is that still a possibility, and is that a conversation that can be had?
Well, obviously, we can have conversations. The landowner has never, in all the years, and this has been around a long time,
Sure.
has never expressed any interest in going into the agriculture preservation, selling of rights, at all. And also.
Has anyone brought it up to him? Because a lot of agricultural landowners aren't
Well, the
aware of
answer is,
anything.
I don't know for sure.
Right.
I don't know of any offer that was ever.
Sure. Well, because there's a difference between farmland preservation and the dozen other ways that you can preserve land in the state that provides a public benefit.
How about lease the farmland, lots of the farmland for these young farmers graduating out of our agricultural program at the high school? They can't afford to buy a farm, so young farmers using new innovative farming practices like regenerative farming, they could lease the land plots to these young farmers who are producing abundance on small acres of land. So maybe that could be used, and the county and the state could partner with this owner of the land. That would help our community, that would help our youth that are graduating out of a ag program in our high school.
Well, I guess the answer is those types of conversations could go on. I think what we're seeing is what the owner of the property in the back feels is obviously a direction he wants to go in at this point.
Do you know if he's ever been approached by anyone else other than How long, do you know how long this gentleman has owned that piece of property back there?
Long time.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It's Santini Farm,
It's
so-
it's been owned
They've
by
been around
them.
Warren County forever.
So,
It has to be 10, 12 years, at least since I've been here, it's been owned by the same people.
and there's never been anything else, he's not been approached by anybody else in all the time he's been there for any other project except for miraculously a warehouse.
But at one point, he had proposed a townhouse development on the back,
Okay? And
and
that,
that went nowhere. He began the planning process, he developed plans, and those plans basically were not pursued, and that was many, I don't even remember how many years ago that was.
So a developer approached him to develop a warehouse, or?
I
how
can't
approach that?
answer for how, I don't know how they connected.
Or did we approach him as
Oh, no,
planners?
the town had nothing to do with approaching them.
can I ask George, how is it that a piece of farmland can be a part of a redevelopment plan and quoted as being blighted?
Well, the redevelopment law allows you to include properties that aren't necessarily blighted in the process if you think that they're an integral part of or would be, what's the best way to put it? I hate to use the word damage, but basically it would be an integral part of the redevelopment area. And in this case, the basic feeling was that since access had to come through the mall, it was essentially something that should be looked together as a common element.
And isn't that kind of contradicted to what a redevelopment plan is? And, I mean, because it's clearly not, it said in the report that it was blighted land.
Well, that's what the mall was described as. The piece in the back was not described that way. I don't have the exact wording here, but it was put in as just being an integral property. It's just like in a redevelopment plan, if there were intervening open space properties, you can include those in your redevelopment plan if you believe it's integral to the plan. And that was our opinion on this piece.
It seems as though that piece of land was put as redevelopment to circumvent the ban on warehouses in the township. Because if that was not part of the redevelopment plan, that gentleman could not build a warehouse on that piece of property. Because we banned warehouses in the township via an ordinance. So I'm trying to figure out why now would you, it just doesn't add up.
And, you know, that property was included, and I don't have the report in front of me, but I did view it. It's said to be used as a buffer against the environmental impact of sprawl development. Warehouses don't really meet that criteria.
Yes, I don't remember that exact wording in there. The property itself was included because of the way the access has to go back through the mall, and it was felt that property in the back, the development of that property has to relate to what goes on at the mall, because if the mall is developed for warehousing, it would be highly unlikely that anybody would want to develop the back for, say, commercial, which I don't think would be, or office, or even for that matter, residential, because of just simply the impact of having the mall redeveloped for warehousing.
I have a question.
Can I have your name?
Yeah, Robert Hopkins, 12 Ramseyburg Road, Columbia, New Jersey. When you were in talk with both townships with the developer, was there any talk, I know you brought up about pilot programs and different things, you know, and I know redevelopment can be impactful, but it can be helpful to the local communities. Was there any talk with the developer of putting a project labor agreement in part of the redevelopment agreement to provide opportunities for local people to build their facility? We see it done in different townships and different municipalities. I heard the lady in the back saying people coming out of high schools and stuff don't have a career, they don't have somewhere to go. I grew up on a farm, and I still have a farm in Milton Township. You know, all we see is the articles out there stating labor shortages and what have you. There aren't labor shortages out there, there's just opportunity shortages for people to have good paying jobs and good paying construction jobs. You know, I've lived in the county my whole life. I've been a 35-year member of the Carpenters Union. I started it right out right here in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, is where my carpenter's local is from, okay? The thing we're always looking for is, if we're gonna rebuild our communities, let's rebuild it with local people and give local residents an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. As to developers' agreements, as far as I know, you can speak for your township, but I know that there's been, nobody's been looking at that yet.
Okay. Thank you.
It's definitely an issue, you know, as those agreements are negotiated with the townships,
Mhm.
that you want to have input at the governing body level.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are signing the redevelopment agreement.
I know, you know, I won't speak for Mike, but again, a little bit, Mike's the president of our building trades here. We've had pretty much a gentleman's handshake agreement over in the redevelopment of the Ingersoll Rand complex,
Yeah.
which has provided a lot of jobs for a lot of local folks and provided, you know, careers for people to go and have viable paying jobs in their community instead of people driving 60, 70 miles to work and taking time away from their families at night. And what happens then is they come home, are they willing to volunteer in your communities, on your fire department, or your first aid squads, or coach your kids' baseball teams, or what have you? No, but when they get an opportunity to build their community, work in their community, and provide in their community, they're there for you, you know, to help your children and get back to the community. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the jobs and those opportunities are certainly an important part of this.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a conversation that should occur.
Okay, thank you.
I can tell you that the warehouses on Streckers Road have more Pennsylvania plate cars in there than New Jersey cars. So if people in this community wanted a job, there was a warehouse right there to get a job. And they're all Pennsylvania cars.
Berry Plastics went out because they had job fairs and Berry Plastics couldn't get people in the community working. So,
No, let's stop this, because I'm
Guys, all right.
tired.
Hey, let's maintain order.
Yeah, let's maintain order.
Easy.
Anything to do.
What's the question? Same thing that you said they
Come on.
did before. What's the question?
How many times you gotta keep saying things to me? Huh?
Tell you.
Come on, we've been doing good tonight.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good, let's maintain.
Also, clapping is not in the decorum in our rules and regulations that are posted up there and on the front of the door.
Happens at every meeting regardless of the rules. I can tell you that.
taking over the clothes for clapping.
Let's regroup and maintain order.
Are there any other questions or comments about this part of it? Because I do want to just move on to the other part of it.
I do have a question about the interior impervious coverage.
Sure.
So there's alternate materials that you can use, right? That
Yeah,
are
yeah,
more
so-
porous, so
Yeah,
I
so-
know that years ago, Lopatcong did a study about all the coverage, and there was in the study options that you could use that, you know, are more environmentally friendly and help with the runoff, et cetera.
So probably since those few years ago when Lopatcong did that, the state has, say, drastically altered the stormwater management rules that
Yeah.
apply
Right, the
statewide.
new standards are coming into play, right?
So now they're revising them again, and they're even more stringent. So part of what the developer has to come up with on a stormwater approach is best management practices like porous pavement to get more infiltration, non-structural stormwater management methods, swales, other types of natural treatment devices. So that again will be an example of another thing that'll be dealt with at the site plan level. But particularly for the piece in the back, there's going to be state permitting required for that. So the state will be reviewing the stormwater management plans for that piece of property. The mall's a little different because it's 80% paved already, you know?
I was gonna ask that, do they have to dig up and put new, or
So
or
they
do they
do,
leave the existing, because there is a concern about flooding in those neighborhoods that
Right, and that-
are downhill.
that was something that we talked about at the last hearing. The basin that's there today is not functioning properly.
No?
Our township engineer has been out there multiple times to field complaints.
Right,
One of the benefits, just of the mall redevelopment is that they're gonna have to repair all that infrastructure. My understanding, I'm only a planner, I'm not an engineer, is that they might not have to deal with water quantity, but they're gonna have to still deal with water quality. So all those paved surfaces, they're gonna have to treat the water that's flowing out of those before it either goes into the ground or into the stream.
the flooding is a real concern, because those neighborhoods there are downhill of the mall.
Yeah, and despite seems a little counterintuitive, but with this development proposal, particularly for the mall, it's gonna correct, they have to correct all of those deficiencies that have basically been ignored by the current owner. Well, now the Cubes owns the mall, I think they closed on it, so now they're gonna have to deal with those issues through redevelopment. So there is a benefit there.
So there is still an option to go above and beyond what the state has, like the towns could ask for more.
Generally, most of the communities in the state have just adopted the state's, standard model ordinance and implemented those requirements. Some communities have gone a little farther. These will be major projects no matter what. So they're gonna have to meet all those, the fact that they're not on the mall. I'm not sure what the timeline is for the new standards to go in effect. I think it's sometime in the next month or two.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's the second
Yeah,
half of 2023, so yes.
So those,
Quarter.
whatever standards are in place at the time the application is filed is what they have to abide by.
And there's no application filed yet.
There is for the mall,
How
for the
convenient.
Cubes at
How
least.
convenient.
Well,
Again, we could ask for more. We could ask for it to be what's in 2023. We have the right to do that as town.
yes and no.
Why not?
Well, because we're bound by the ordinances that are on the books at the time the application's filed. So we
But if they
can't,
want to build in our town, we can say,
Well-
we need,
at least from my township's perspective, I think they're comfortable that the state regulations are stringent enough. If you talk to any developer that's been building in this state over the last 10 years, they will tell you that it's gotten a lot more difficult to comply with those standards, and it increases costs pretty dramatically. So,
Sure.
all right, any other questions on this? No? Okay, so let me just move quickly, because I kind of get the sense most of you are here for this part of the discussion, not the next part. But, let's see. This one. It's not. Okay. So the other part of the proposed center expansion is what we call the Zarbatani tract in Lopatcong. It's south, rather west of South Main Street. Hold on, let me get this full screen. So this is South Main Street, runs down along the front of the site. The Possibilities store is located on the front part of this. Part of Lopatcong's difficulty in our affordable housing settlement was coming up with locations where we could build affordable housing. Right now, the proposal for this particular site is for what we call 100% affordable housing development. So that means if 96 units are built, all 96 are affordable. That's done through a combination of subsidy from New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance, plus some subsidy from the township's development fees, of which there'll be significant contributions from the warehouse developments. This tract was left out of the center initially. We've talked with Highlands staff about this property in particular. Developers doesn't have a concept fully developed yet, but they're aware of the resource issues. So very similar to how we're handling the south side of the mall, all the resource constraints that exist on the property will be addressed through the development plan. It's essentially about 30% of the lot will be covered with development with the current proposal. There is, the Lopac Creek is obviously on the other side of the road, but there are riparian buffers that extend, on the northeastern part of the site, northwestern part of the site. All the development would be focused essentially here with access gained from South Main Street through this little finger that goes up. And then there will be a series of probably 3 or 4 buildings of 24 units that would be built there. So this was, as I said, a critical component of the township's affordable housing obligation and meeting that. And the fact that they're all affordable units, I think the Highlands was very supportive of. So again, similar resource issues. We have open water buffers, wetlands, all those things will be accommodated in the development plan that goes forward. Does anybody want to see anything more particular about this tract?
How do we get sewer capacity for that?
So there is sewer capacity. There's a sewer line that is in South Main Street. There's also public water that's available.
is there actually sewer capacity, or, there's sewer mains in the area, but is there actual capacity? Because I know Peterborough struggles with sewer capacity.
Yeah, there is, Ron. And part of the overarching discussion on sewer is, our biggest problem is infiltration and I&I. So the sewer authority now is gonna have to work with the townships to go through and try to recapture some of that, because we lose a pretty significant amount of capacity due to I&I. So part of that is an ongoing discussion to address that.
What's INI? I'm sorry.
It's infiltration and, what's the other I? Oh,
Well, I don't know, I described it the way you do, it's basically infiltration into the pipes.
yeah, so it's twofold. It's stormwater that flows into the sanitary sewer, but also infiltration that happens from groundwater when pipes are not properly connected. So a lot of the infrastructure is old. I'm sorry?
Inflow? Is it inflow?
It could be inflow and infiltration, I think. So it's, the DEP does not permit what they call combined sewer overflow anymore, where you can have stormwater and sanitary water mixing together and going to the plant. They want to try to eliminate that, so that's part of the issue in our system. But in talking with the township engineer as well as the sewer authority, there is capacity for these projects.
And how many total units did you say?
Who was that?
Lori Bonnet, 731 Brandywine Way,
Can you spell your last name?
Bonnent.
So right now in Lopatcong, it's going to be somewhere between 72 and 96 units. It really depends on the financing structure that the developer can get as to how many units, and it could be a two-phase project as well, where 60 or so are built in the beginning, and then another 36 could come later. And the township's going to contribute affordable housing trust funds to that developer in order to make the development viable. Any other questions?
1 or 2 bedroom?
I'm sorry?
1 or 2 bedroom?
So there'll be a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. 30% of them, so if you get a New Jersey HMFA 9% tax credit financing deal, 30% of your units have to be 3 bedroom. Normally it's 20, but they require you to do more. So this is a good family rental opportunity, not just for our township, but for the region. So, and the redeveloper, I'll say, is a very seasoned affordable housing builder. And they not only build their communities, but they own them and manage them. They never sell any of their projects to other parties. They own and operate them themselves, which is attractive. They have on-site staff and staff within the region that help manage their projects. Any other questions on that one? Yeah, I didn't think most of you were here for that. Anything else you want to cover?
Well, I think we've probably covered it. Does anybody have anything different than what we've heard here? We'll actually be having a similar hearing in Lopatcong Township on the
March 6th.
March 6th,
At the municipal building.
to continue this discussion on the project itself and why we're proposing it. If you have any additional questions, you can bring them up there. If you think of something now that's different, you're ready to answer. If not, we'll repair and.
You can have the statements, or?
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So let me just close this down and I'll move, and then I think probably better to come up to the podium, so,
I just have one more question in the back.
What was the time frame on this?
you mean for the petition itself?
Well,
So I'll just describe the process a little bit. So we're having these public information sessions on the petition amendment. Once it's approved by resolution by both of the governing bodies, then it goes to the Highlands Council for review. Once it's submitted, that starts a 60-day comment period. So this petition amendment is circulated internally to state agencies related to the Highlands, plus it's posted for public comment. Then the Highlands Council will schedule a public hearing at which George and I will appear and present to the council what the proposal is. And then there'll also be an opportunity for public comment at the council meeting.
I have question regarding the whole process itself. Back in October, Lopatcong Council passed an ordinance 2022-08 to adopt their redevelopment plans and to request Highland Center designation. And that was done on October 5th,
Right.
4 months ago. So was that done backwards? Should they have had this public hearing first before they had what they considered a public hearing on October 5th?
Well, no, so there's gonna be a few opportunities for public comment. One opportunity are the 3 sessions that George and I have had, so we've had 2 already. There'll be a third one on March 6th in the Powhatan building at 7:30. Independently, the governing bodies have to approve at a public meeting forwarding the petition amendment to the Highlands Council for
But they
action.
did that in October.
Yeah, but it was more to prepare the petition for submission. It may have been worded funny, but we couldn't have submitted it until all this process was
Okay,
completed.
so Lopatcong is going to have another public hearing, an actual public hearing with public comments before they can submit that to the Highlands Council.
Yes.
Correct? Okay, thank you.
And so again, there'll be, since it's gonna be at a governing body session, whatever the normal publication for that is in the agenda. So I'm not sure at this point. So we have to conclude the public information sessions. We have to incorporate those comments into the amendment as an appendix. Then it's gonna go to both governing bodies for approval. So just keep an eye on the agendas over the next, I would say it's possible that it could be on the agenda for Powhatan at the March meeting because we meet the 3rd week of the month. So it's likely that it'll be up, and I can give you the date, actually.
No, I can look it up.
I can tell you, since everybody's sitting here. It's going to be March 21st.
Okay, and comments from this public information center is going to be captured as part of.
Correct.
Okay.
So we have recordings of the prior meeting, Beth has a recording of this meeting, we'll record the meeting in Powhatan, and then we're gonna summarize those comments in an appendix to the council.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any other process questions? Okay, I mean, if anybody wants to make a general statement, feel free.
I would prefer you to come up and speak into the microphone though, so we can capture you.
I'll make a statement.
And you have 3 minutes.
John Ketcherson, 38 Jade Lane. Thank you for answering the questions that we've brought before you. I attended the first public information hearing, and we asked questions about what other things have been considered, and you guys were asked that again tonight. And one of the reasons I asked about timing is that in 2020, the Lopatcong Council passed Resolution 20-12 to support removing warehouses from ROM. And one of the reasons was the quote, redevelopment status has been requested at the site of the nearly vacant Phillipsburg Mall. If approved, this would result in another 483,000 square feet of warehousing, high cube warehousing in Lopatcong. George, when you presented the redevelopment plans to the Lopatcong Planning Board on September 8th, you talked about different things that might have been considered. Then you said, quote, I'll be honest with you, Powhatan really felt very strongly and wanted to develop their portion of the mall as a warehouse. And, you know, it just seems to me that you guys went in with the goal of, let's put a warehouse on this place. We're going to use this process, property in need of redevelopment, to get what we wanted. It doesn't seem to me that you went into this thing looking at, you know, what can we do? What can we do to benefit the public? Because nobody was asked about, you know, their input. Your traffic study, a lady asked about the traffic study. If you look at the data, the report, your plan states there's going to be a significant decrease in traffic by 1.4 million square feet of warehousing. Doesn't make sense. The data shows that there's going to be nearly an additional 500 trips per hour for Saturday peak hours. That's not a decrease. That's a significant increase. We asked about a couple of people asked about the process, and you're talking about those subcommittees, and they've been reporting back to the general counsel. And on page 18 of the petition, it states that, quote, the process will be transparent with public meetings. We are having a public meeting tonight, but I've been attending council meetings in Lopatcong for well over a year now and been asking about these at many of the meetings. And I can assure you, this process has not been transparent whatsoever. The council has been absolutely denying any knowledge of the redevelopment plans and has been stating that warehouses cannot be built here. Here's some examples. On April 6th, Bill Wright said, we may get a parking lot, but right next to a warehouse or a piece of grass. On July 6th, they said, we haven't had any warehouses proposed there. We don't have the plan yet ourselves. Jim Mangucci said, where they're coming up with that, I don't know. I know they have something proposed over there. Bill Wright said, I made the statement a couple times, we get a parking lot. That doesn't sound like a warehouse to me. This has not been an open, transparent process whatsoever.
Robert Bruce, 11 Harwich Road. I just want to continue from the statement John got cut off at. On August 22nd, we were told that a warehouse could not be built on the Lopatcong side of the mall property. I believe these are direct quotes from council meeting. Perhaps a parking lot could be built. Bill Wright asked, how can a warehouse be built on the farmer's field, which is environmentally constrained? November 2nd, less than a month after voting to adopt the redevelopment plans and request Highland Center designation, Lopatcong Council was asked how many more warehouses are planned for Lopatcong. Mayor Mangucci answered one. When asked where, he stated the warehouse on Strikers on the solar field. I don't know how they can make statements like that, and you can come before us and say, you've been working on this. I don't get it. It doesn't add up.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, again, so we'll have another session just like this one in Powhatan on March 6th, 7:30 in the municipal building. There's going to be a notice published in the newspaper, but of course, feel free to spread the word, and hopefully we'll see you then. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.